Hello, everybody. My name's Sally Gibson, and I'm the Managing Director at Dawleys. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Deborah, who's an award-winning HR leader, author, and speaker, and is known for her practical approach to building cultures that are lived and not just declared. Welcome, Deborah. Lovely to see you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So today, Deborah and I are going to be talking about the Dawleys white paper, where we are exploring culture in action and how we can build a thriving workplace. So specifically, we're going to be looking at Deborah's chapter that I asked her to contribute to, which was about purpose and values and how they align and how they help build a thriving workplace. So to kick things off then, just to get things started, I had a conversation recently with somebody who said to me, culture, oh, Sally, isn't that just the fluffy stuff? I couldn't disagree more, but I just wondered if it was worthwhile us exploring, in your view, what it is culture and why is it so important to businesses and organizations?
Sure. And then, do you know what? I'd love to hear your answer. As a business leader, that would be great. So I'll give the HR perspective on it, but also as a leader myself. From my perspective, culture, and I love this definition, culture is what's happening when no one else is looking. It's really like that personality of the company. So if you look at it that way, I guess my challenge to this person is, how would you like to work with people who had no personality? I love AI. Don't get me wrong. I think AI is great, but it doesn't have a personality. It spits out answers all the time to you, which are brilliant, but no personality. And I think that's really what culture is. It's that heart and the soul of the organization, that heartbeat. So no, I do not think it's fluffy at all. It's what keeps things going and thriving and moving forward. Without it, we would just be very bland.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for us, it's what makes us,
Absolutely.
It's what defines us. It's where we are doing our best work and being the best support that we can be for our people, and we are working and attracting the best sort of clients where we do our best work. So for us, culture is absolutely fundamental to what we do, and yeah, without it, who are we?
Yeah, and it's interesting because my second book I wrote has a model called the Employee Engagement Bridge, and it talks about all the different things that drive employee engagement. And I had quite a few people who said to me, why is culture not, there's 10 elements of the bridge. Why is culture not an element of the bridge? And I said, because culture is an output. It's not like you're going to put in place a culture program. It's all those pieces that add up together that really drive your culture.
And I think as well, when we started looking at this as a business, we were discussing our culture and we sat down and said, so where do we do our best work? Behaviors are we exhibiting when we are doing our best work here? And immediately that sort of led on to what are our core values and ultimately what is our purpose. Yeah. And that was really difficult. And I think lots of businesses find it quite difficult to define what their purpose is, unless you're saving the whale or rainforest or whatever. What exactly is your purpose there? And we ended up boiling this down to a question, which was, are we making life better for someone today? Because that was an easy hook for people to grab onto, if you like. Do you have any tips or ideas or ways that leaders can actually start creating a purpose that drives decision making, really? Is there anything about that? Because I think it's an area that people do struggle with.
They do. And I think that's why purpose and values are so connected, because for both of those, I would answer the question the same way. Both your purpose and your values is really, going back to what we said, it's what you're all about. What are your marching orders? What are you all trying to achieve? And I think my first tip would be that both your purpose and your values need to be able to be lived both with your customers, but also within your organization. And that's why I love yours, because it goes both ways. I worked for a company and our purpose was making the world a better place to work. And it was because we had technology. So the technology was helping workforces. But then also I used it as my marching orders as an HR leader. It was making our companies a better place to work. So yeah, I think it has to be something that you truly can embrace. It can work in both directions. And also it's something that you can live. When I wrote my book on values, some of the companies that I was interviewing that I didn't put in the book, it wasn't really driving the business. I was talking to them and they were saying how some of our values, they're really hard to live. Well, then Either you have to change the way your culture works, or you need to get rid of it as a value. And sometimes your values have to evolve. One company I interviewed said that as the company grew, they said from a teenager to an adult, their values had to change because the business worked in different ways.
I think that's really interesting, because I think that, yeah, I've noticed that. And sometimes I've thought, well, actually, as we've developed as a company and our thinking is developed, then yeah, I think it's being bold enough and brave enough to say, actually, that's where we were, but that's now where we're going to be, or where we're moving towards. So yeah, really interesting.
I was just going to pick up on that, because in that particular example, the only value they changed had to do with ownership. And it was a slight tweak. And you'll appreciate this as your company has grown. When they were small, ownership was about owning your piece of the pie. But as they got bigger and more collaboration had to happen, that's when they evolved the value and the behaviors behind it. Because values should also take you to the next level. So
Yeah.
you something that's going to help you work more effectively and then get to that next level.
And I think what we found as well is that it's not, culture is not and values are not a sort of destination. It's a continuous journey, and you can't just stick them on the wall and walk away. That's in fact,
Wouldn't that be nice? Life would be a lot easier, but yeah.
if only it was that easy.
Yeah.
But it's not. And I get that when somebody says it's hard work to live those values, because it is hard work sometimes, because you have to make business decisions, and perhaps that's not always in line with what your values are. But actually, if it's not in line with your values, then perhaps it's not the right decision, I think, as well, is because I think then you don't buy into it. And we try and use our values to align all of our decision making, really, because otherwise, what's the point in having them? And you need to have them.
And your employees see through you also.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was writing my values book, a company that I interviewed, and I love this example. Now, this happened before COVID and the world has changed, but it was a travel company. And one of their values was about focusing on the customer and doing what's right for the customer. And one of their employees, and I love when employees do this, they went to the CEO and said, we've got this value, then why do we, in situations where our customers have to last minute cancel a holiday because of plans changing, things like that, why do they lose their money? It doesn't connect if our customers are important. And the CEO said, you know what, we're right. And they changed their policy. Now, I know more travel companies do that now, but back then, nobody did that at all. And to me, that's nirvana, when your employees are questioning and challenging you on those types of things. I've got a puppy who keeps nipping my ankle. It's the same thing. Your employees are nipping at the ankle going, I don't know, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, it's got to feel right, and it has to feel genuine. So I think you talk about as well bringing your values out to play. So could you give me some examples of how that would look in sort of day-to-day life?
Yeah, and it's interesting because that phrase came about when I was talking to someone, and it was an MD of a company, and I was interviewing her for the book. And she goes, oh yeah, we bring our values out to play. And I love that phrase. As a matter of fact, when I wrote the book, I would do talks and I would bring balls with me and throw them. I'm like, there are things that you have to catch, you have to use, those types of things. And I think the trick with values and bringing them out to play is that you just think about all the different touch points that you have. So I'm an HR person. So from an HR perspective, what are all those employee touch points? So how do you live the values when you interview someone? How do you live the values on that first day when you go through onboarding? How do you live it when you give people their benefit programs or their pay, or the list just goes on from an employee experience. But then what some companies don't do, and you'll appreciate this as a business leader, is then how do you bring the values into the business touch points? How do you run a meeting that lives your values? How do you make decisions that, it's not a one and done. It's like, I always picture my values on my shoulders. Am I living them? Am I using them? You're ignoring me today. That's why you can't have too many values, because you don't want too many on your shoulder.
Very true. What can leaders do to make culture something that the team feels as well? Because I think for me, a challenge is when you've got lots of people in an organization and we're all different, we're all individuals, but somehow we want to bring them together as a team. What can we do to actually try and make something that they actually feel as a thing almost. It's a sort of, you must have talked to lots of different companies about how they do this.
Yeah, I think the starting point, and it seems really basic, but so many companies don't do this, is to understand exactly what it means. And a lot of times when I work with companies, I talk about what does the culture and values mean to the company? What does it mean to my team? I don't know, say I'm running payroll or something. And then what does it mean to me personally as an employee? So I think it starts with really that deep understanding. And then understanding what we talked about before is how can I bring it into different things? I'm working with the client right now, and I'm absolutely loving this project because we're doing all these value sessions. Like one value session was just on performance management. So how can you use values in performance management? How can you use it in recognition? We're doing another workshop on storytelling, another one on decision making. And I just love the idea that people are being that intentional about knowing what it means and then knowing how to use it, bringing it in that way. I think to me, that's really the starting point.
When I was reading through this and looking at what you'd written, and you talk about creating a safe space for people to be able to feel free to actually say something or comment or give feedback and things. And I was thinking back to when I was first starting out in my sort of working career, and I ended up working in an environment where I was working in IT, and it was at a time when there was not many women in IT. I was very young, and whilst I was definitely noticed, I don't think I was ever really heard. And I felt that growing up now and now being a leader of a company, it was important to me that I could create a safe space, particularly for young women, but for everybody as well, with which they could feel heard. And I think this is probably one of the most challenging things to do. And again, I'd be interested to hear if you've got any ideas about how we can actually build that out or build that safe space for people.
Yeah, again, I think the starting point is just to understand why it's important to do it. I think a lot of leaders, I was brought up with the idea as a leader, I have all the answers. I even had one boss who told me, I'd say, I want to go out and talk to my employees. And he'd say, isn't that what I pay you for? Aren't you the one who has all the answers? So I think we first have to have that mindset in that we need to hear what our people have to say, but also they need us to be heard. There's lots of studies that talk about employees are more engaged when they feel like they have a voice. There's also one of my favorite models is something called the iceberg of ignorance. I think I shared that one with you when we spoke before, where it's this idea that as leaders, we don't know everything that's going on. We don't know all of the icebergs. So if we just sit in our little office or sit on top of the iceberg, we're going to be hitting things without involving our employees. So again, we need to understand why it's important both to us and also to our employees.
I think as well that words are very powerful, and can completely swing how something that you say with one intention comes out completely opposite. So for example, for us, we don't call it call monitoring, because that sounds like we are going to go and beat them around with a stick or something. So it's about call coaching, because what we want to do is improve their skills.
Can I jump on the bandwagon of that, Bill? Sorry, because I love that. And I think you are so right. Words can make such a difference. And I spoke at a conference once, and right after me was the CEO of WD-40. And he introduced me to the words of, instead of calling them mistakes, calling them learning moments. And I absolutely love that, because just by twisting it and calling it a learning moment, all of a sudden it gives people the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I didn't go back to your psychological safety. Hey, I got it wrong. One company I interviewed actually created a oops, I got it wrong Slack channel, so that it was like encouraged. Not only do you admit it to your boss, but you share it widely so that nobody else creates an oops moment. And to be honest with you, that's what a lot of my books are. My very first book that I wrote was basically my oops. When you talk to your employees, don't make the mistakes that I made type of thing. Yeah. I have to call it an oops book instead of.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
So I was just thinking about how coaching conversations, how we can use them to strengthen alignment with our value and our purpose, because I think perhaps sometimes we're not great at giving feedback. And for me, I think giving feedback is actually listening, maybe doing more listening than actually talking. So again, I don't know whether you agree with that or whether or not there is some sort of coaching tips about how we bring in our values and alignment into our coaching conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because my latest book I wrote on leadership, I've got these building blocks. And originally I was going to have one building block, which was about how you develop your people. But I intentionally created another building block called coaching, because as you say, coaching is very different. I go back to when I was a gymnast. Coaching, my coach was not standing on the balance beam. I was the one standing on the balance beam doing the trick. And I think you're right. When it comes to coaching, our role is not to get up on the balance beam and do the trick. And we need to remind ourselves that. Again, I think that's coaching is becoming much more popular and people are learning the skills to do it. And I'm so excited because a lot of people, coaching is so much more effective than development. Sending someone a training class or like saying, these are the 3 ways to do it, instead of saying, I've got this new opportunity or this new project I want you to work on. How do you think you should do it? And go to them and then work together. I think that is so much more powerful. It can get so much more out of people.
And I'm just going back to something that you said earlier on about when I first started my sort of leadership journey, I actually did think it was my role to know how to do everybody's job. And
Yep.
actually, that's not my role at all. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time talking to people and the team thinking that I needed to learn how to do their jobs. That's not my role. And that's not where I'm going to bring out the best in them as a team. And my role is to actually ask the right questions and then talk to them about any issues they may have and how we can resolve them, or coaching, etc., etc. But yeah, that was fascinating when you said that.
The very first time I had a boss who was not from HR. So to me, the very first time I had one, I thought, oh, how can they be my leader? They haven't gone up through the ranks. They haven't learned HR. And oh my gosh, they were absolutely amazing. And to your point, I just learned so much more about how having somebody with a different perspective who's going to challenge me can be so much better. And then, as you talked about, empower them.
Mm-hmm.
Be there to support them, but not to give them all the answers. So important.
I can remember when you were down with the team last year, and one of the things that you said was we had the triangle, and I think it was something like we forget 50% of what we're told within 30 minutes. We forget 70 to 80% within 24 hours. And after 7 days, 90% of that has gone.
I'm glad you remembered that. I'm glad. I always forget the statistics. It's called the forgetting curve. And I always forget the numbers. I know it's a big number, but yeah, no, you got it right.
I can never remember the name of it, mind you. So the
Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Yeah.
There we go. So I think for me as the leader of Dawleys, I think I always joke in a way that one of my job titles is Chief Repetition Officer, because that's what I have to, because we have to overcome or recognize that just because we say it doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily taken on board. And talking to some of the other contributors to the white paper, the 2 words that have come up consistently have been communication and consistency in that communication. So do you agree with, are those key to you as well, and why would they be key, or is there anything else that we need to be thinking about in communication?
I agree and disagree.
Okay.
Because I think it's definite consistency, but it's consistency and inconsistency. And what I mean by that is that all of our people are so different, and I've learned this the hard way. So you need to consistently have the same key message. You have to be inconsistent in how you do it. So for example, one person might really gel with an email message, a short, sweet email message. Somebody else, based off of their personality and style, they might need the whole, I'm sure you have people like this, they want the whole manual. Somebody else, you might need a video. Somebody else might need a face-to-face. So I think, yeah, you have to keep doing it, having that same core message, but don't be afraid to do it in different ways, because as you said before, people are going to forget it anyway.
Yeah.
You might think you're bothering people. And I learned this the hard way. I'm like, oh, this is the 5th time I've told my employees this. And they're like, I didn't hear you the first 3 times, or I didn't understand it the first 3 times.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've started looking at here is using AI to actually generate the message, but in different ways.
I love
So
it.
can we do it visually? Can we do it, as you say, as a written piece of documentation?
Mhm.
Is there a way that we can make this a doing thing? And yes, I think using AI has been really interesting and start to open up some sort of good ideas about how we do that.
Yep.
This is a question that's come up a few times as well. So is culture more important than strategy?
No, I think they're both important. You can't have one without the other, to be honest with
No.
you. Strategy drives your culture, culture drives your strategy. I think it's an ebb and flow going back and forth.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that as well. And I know some people sort of say, oh, I think the people who think it's all fluffy, it's a strategy. But for me, you can't have one without the other. Have you seen in your experience any sort of companies where there is a disconnect between the strategy and the culture?
Yeah, because I don't think sometimes we're as intentional when it comes to that. Or we might have a strategy, going back to what we were talking about before, where we don't embed it fully. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a company and they wanted me to look at their benefit programs. And their benefit programs were all about, or their culture and their values was about one for all for one. We do it together. And then when I looked at their benefit programs, it was very much, and I get this because the old way of doing benefits was very hierarchical. So, you get a company car, you get private medical, you get 30 days of holiday, but you only get 15 days of holiday. And I challenged them. I'm like, you can't say that this is what you're all about and then have such a disconnect. There can be some disconnects because you can say, we're not going to give everybody a company car, but these people need a company car to do their job. Like, why should you give a vice president 25 days of holiday and a payroll clerk 15 days of holiday? Explain that to me. So I think, and it wasn't intentional. I have nothing against this company at all, but I just don't think they connected the dots between all of their individual programs. And one of the things that I often do, whoever's listening can do it themselves, is I almost do an assessment, traffic light approach, where I'll take all the different programs and I'll line them up against your culture and values and say, green light, this works perfect. Yellow, ooh, you might need to tweak it a little bit. Or red light, this is a disconnect. And you either need to admit that it's a disconnect or you need to change it. Yeah, that, to me, that's a good way of going about it.
One of the questions that I've asked everybody so far is, if you were coaching a new leader, is there one question they should be asking themselves, or you would think they should be asking themselves? And I'll give you an example. So I was talking to one of the other contributors, Bradley, on it, and he said one of the question that he heard recently was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I thought that was a great question, because that really makes you think about what you're doing and what would I do if I wasn't afraid. So I just wondered if there was a question or one or two questions, I don't know, that you thought, actually, this is something that if I was coaching a leader, this is something that I would ask them to think about.
I think the first one is, and you'll know this from the model from my book, is self-awareness. I think as a new leader, as an experienced leader, we should always be looking in the mirror and understanding what we're all about. So what are our natural strengths? And what we all need development. None of us are perfect. So as a leader, we know our employees need, I don't know, our model has 14 building blocks, whatever, 5, 6, whatever. These are the things that my people expect of me. Which are the ones that I can naturally do? Which are the ones that I need to focus on getting better? And then I think the flip side of it, and it's another mirror analogy, is new leaders get to know your people. Because we all know everybody is different. Everybody has different needs. Everybody learns and grows in different ways. So get to know yourself and get to know your people, and constantly be looking in the mirror, because we're all changing.
Yeah. And we change, business change, just got to see what's going on in the world at the moment. Everything's upside down. Yeah,
absolutely.
You've got to be resilient and adaptable, I think.
Yeah.
is really important.
And I see it as a positive and not a negative. Some people are like, oh man, I've got 10 people. They're all different. I have to learn different ways to deal with them. I see it as, wow, I've got 10 people. I'm going to learn so much about different ways of doing things and different people. I guess my advice would be, if you see these types of things as something you don't want to do, then maybe being a leader is not the right place for you. And not everybody is meant to be a leader. When I design jobs in organizations, I often create an individual contributor pathway, because you don't want to force someone to do something they're not comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think that's really important as well. And you need to be strong enough in a way, or self-aware enough to recognize, am I right for this or not? And I think we mentioned when you were down with us that we did all the disc profiling with the team, and how eye-opening that has been for lots of people. One, to understand themselves, but also to understand perhaps why they have communication challenges, let's say, with other people, because they could be very direct and there's no fluffy stuff. It goes straight in. We want a decision, whatever. And other people, as you say, want the whole manual to go inside out, upside down, the wheres, the whys, and so it's important to be able to recognize yourself, but also to recognize other people's styles as well, if you want to get the best out of them.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest mistakes that I made, and we spoke about it in the session, is that I just naively assumed that I should wear my personality when I deal with my people, as opposed to wearing theirs. I'm the type of person, who's very direct. And when I would give feedback, that's how I would do it, because that's how I want to receive it. And we as leaders need to remember that it might be a bit more uncomfortable to wear their colors or their personality, but that's the way that it's going to work more effectively.
Yeah, yes. And I think somebody said to me, you're not being true to yourself. And I am, actually, because I'm recognizing in myself how I am, and I am trying to give the people that I'm talking to the best opportunity to express and understand what I'm saying and express themselves back to me. So thank you for that, Deborah. That's been absolutely brilliant. I've loved this conversation. I always feel energized when I'm with you.
And you know what? I love talking to you also, because I work with so many different leaders, and having a leader like you who absolutely gets it and absolutely drives it, it's an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And I wish there were more leaders out there like you. I think the world would be, going back to that purpose from my other company, the world would be a better place to work with more leaders like you.
Oh, gosh, I'm going to be blushing now. Thank you, Deborah. And thank you for your time today. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon.